Mindful Dietitian podcast. I'm Fiona Sutherland, body-inclusive non-diet dietitian and yoga teacher from Melbourne, Australia, and director of the Mindful Dietitian. Please join me as I have important conversations with dietitians and health professionals from all over the world about getting brave and leaning into tough conversations as we cultivate a strong community of practitioners committed to body-inclusive practice. We'll talk about mindfulness, we'll dig into diet culture, and we'll explore ways of bringing courageous and important topics into our professional spaces so we can more deeply understand our own experience and make our work more meaningful. Thank you for joining me. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to this next episode of the Mindful Dietitian podcast. Okay, so this one's a little bit different because the tables are turned on me. I invited my friend and our colleague Christy Harrison on to interview me about my new book, Vitamin A to Z, Your BS-Free Guide to Wellbeing. So in this conversation, we share how the book actually came to fruition and my intentions and hopes for the book. And we'd also talk about things like stages of change, which is a transtheoretical model. And then we talked more about specific chapters like Vitamin M for mindfulness, Vitamin H for health redefined, and vitamin V for values. So we dive into some of the individual vitamins as well as talking about the writing process, and there are plenty of laughs along the way. Christy is so generous and so warm, and I'm so grateful to you, Christy, for giving up your time and resources to have some fun with me and to press record on this conversation. Super grateful. Thank you so much. All right. So for those of you who don't know Christy, I want to tell you a little bit about her. So Christy is an anti-diet registered dietitian nutritionist, certified intuitive eating counselor, and most well known specifically over the past few years as author of the book Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Wellbeing and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating. Christy offers online courses and private intuitive eating coaching to help people all over the world make peace with food and their bodies. Since 2013, Christy has hosted the very famous food site. She didn't write that. I added that little bit. A weekly podcast exploring people's relationships with food and paths to body liberation. It's now, unsurprisingly, one of Apple's top 100 health podcasts, reaching tens of thousands of listeners worldwide each week. So if you haven't read Anti-Diet, I would personally highly recommend it. It is not only clever and intelligent, it also steps through so cleverly how diet culture really steals from us, all of us, and most notably those in marginalized bodies, and how we can elevate voices and contribute towards body liberation for everybody. So highly recommend not only Anti-Diet, but then also Food Site Podcast. Again, I just wanted to say a huge thanks to Christy for your time and energy, for coming on and having this conversation with me. It was super fun. There are lots of laughs, so you'll have to forgive us. We are very familiar with one another. And if you're interested in more back catalogue episodes of The Mindful Dietitian or any online courses or trainings, upcoming events, or you would like to join us in our closed Facebook group, you can do so at www.themindfuldietitian.com.au. It would be fantastic to have you as part of our community as we grow and learn together in the service of body liberation for all people. Thank you so much. Hope you really enjoy this episode with Christy Harrison and I. Hello and welcome back to this next episode of the Mindful Dietitian podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. So today we're doing something a little bit different, and I'm going to be joined by my friend, my colleague, an anti-diet advocate and activist extraordinaire, Christy Harrison, who you will probably remember from episode 65 and also episode 3, I believe. So an early episode and then a more recent one from 2020. So Christy is here joining me, and we are going to do a turn the tables, specifically to have a conversation about my new book, Vitamin A to Z, Your BS-Free Guide to Wellbeing. So a huge welcome to you, Christy, and thank you so much for being so generous and joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be back. And I have to say, I loved your book. It was such a pleasure to read. It was like hanging out with you, like just a mix of compassion and kindness and fun and hilarity and all of the things. So I'm really excited to talk with you about it.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. And, you know, many of you listening will be familiar with Christy's book, Anti-Diet, which episode 65, we really dive down into, the process of writing that and developing that. So I'm sure we will be referring back to that content and your future projects too, which I'll be really excited to talk about. So what I'm going to do now, if it's okay with you, Christy, is I'm just going to hand over to you, which feels a little bit, it feels so different. I mean, I am recording, I have done the introduction, and now I'm like, okay, take it away, Christy. So go for it.
Handing over the keys.
Okay.
Well, thank you for trusting me to do this, and I'm so excited. So, the first question I have for you, I think, is kind of setting the stage and just telling people a little bit about, the concept behind the book. I was really struck by the fact that, vitamins are usually presented either as like this wellness diet thing, like this superfood is jam-packed with vitamins, or, it's very clinical. It's like, take this vitamin to support bone health, or, this mineral will reverse your anemia, or whatever it is, right? And so this take of yours on vitamins is really unique and really interesting. And I would just love to know, like, how you came up with the concept for this book, this title, this way of organizing the ideas.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. So it has an interesting evolution, actually. So a number of years ago now, maybe 4 or even maybe 5 years ago, I did a series called Vitamin A to Z on Facebook, and chose different words which matched the letters A to Z. And some of the words are very different to what's in the book now, but the response from the anti-diet and health at every size community, my colleagues, and the more broad community, was really overwhelmingly positive. People found it a really interesting, light-hearted way to take a look at different skills and different qualities that we can develop to be able to develop, whether it's resilience or develop an understanding or develop compassion or awareness around our positionality in the world and what diet culture has to do with that, and our socializations and so forth. So originally it was like a Facebook A to Z type of thing. And I noticed that people were really interested, and it really built a beautiful community. And then what I did was I actually made it into a pack of cards. So as you know, Christy, I've got the mindful eating cards. I've got the body healing cards, which I co-developed with Marcy Evans. And I've got some values cards as well, specifically to talk about, food and eating oriented values. And then I had the vitamin A to Z cards, and they always sold really quite well, and people seem to really like them because it not only was about food, eating, and bodies, or our relationship to and with food, eating, and bodies, but also kind of took us in a few different directions in terms of really questioning our socializations and questioning how it was that we have come to believe these particular things about food and eating and our bodies. And with a fair dose of sass, I guess, which is my usual way of speaking and my usual way of writing too, because, there is something really, I think, really important alongside compassion, and that is like a fierce compassion, a sense of stability and a sense of real solidness in the care that we take for ourselves. So the evolution from there was, it kind of paused there, and then it became the cards, and I've circled around A to Z for quite a number of years now. So then when I was approached to write a book, or this is called a mini because it's small in size and small in kind of thickness, but hopefully not short on depth. That was my main aim, is not too short on depth, short in length, not in depth. And
definitely succeed in that, I think.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's not easy, actually, because I was given a word limit of 18,000 words, and I was so scared that I wouldn't make it that I ended up at 23,000, actually.
Had a similar experience with my book. It seems like such a lot of words when they tell you a word limit, and so then it's hard not to just overshoot it.
Right, exactly. And I'm not somebody who, for example, has done a thesis or a PhD or anything like that. So I really had, I had a loose concept of what this looked like in terms of the number of, pieces of paper or something. But really, I would just keep writing and writing and writing. And then I was like, oh, shit. Whoops, that's way too much. See ya, bye, editor. Hello, editor alert. And then she ended up doing this magic with it, which brought it back down into some semblance of, boundaries.
I love it. Editors are great. They're, we all need an editor. Even editors. Oh, yes,
need editors, definitely. So. And the way that an editor provides boundaries is particularly spectacular.
Yes, boundaries. And that's such an important topic as well that we can discuss. But I'm curious, first of all, speaking of boundaries, actually, like, especially for the other dietitians in the audience who might be thinking about writing books of their own, I'm curious to know how you made time to write this book with everything else you have going on, your work as a dietitian, private practice, and also having a family and, just how you juggled all the things.
Okay, so I had a funny / not funny conversation with one of the other parents at school only a couple of months ago now, and she said, congratulations on the book, I really look forward to, buying a copy. This was before it came out. And she said, it probably was like the best timing ever to, write a book during COVID, because the kids were home from school in Melbourne, where I live, for about 6 months. It was a long time. And I said to her, not somebody I know particularly well, but lovely and so well-intentioned. And I said to her, I'll have to be honest with you. It was not. It was like the opposite of the best time, because I was juggling like so many things, and also being an eating disorder specialist, also focusing really on holding space for my clients and my supervisees and people who were really trusting me to hold a steady space. So to be writing a book in that time, I won't lie to you, Christy, and everybody else listening, that it was tough. It really was tough. And had I known how tough it was going to be, I probably would have said no. I actually did say no at first, because I didn't see myself really as an author or a writer. But then when I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I've got so much content for A to Z. Why don't I just do A to Z? Like, I really know this content, And so to loop back to your question, the juggle was real. It really was real. I found myself getting up early in the morning, before I was supporting my kids with their schooling, and then before I was working, doing my own work, I would stay up at night to do it. And so I had to set aside deliberately some specific time where I was able to really focus and get ideas down in a coherent way. And I hadn't done this really in this way before, because it hasn't necessarily been available to me for many years that I've been able to get any more than, say, an hour, to myself at a time. And now I really had to carve out 2-3 hour blocks at a time. And so if I had an hour, I was able to, for example, respond to some emails and do a social media post. And for me, what happened with that was it kept me on top of things and kept things going. But an hour when you're writing a book didn't allow me to draw the ideas together in a way that really allowed me to take those further steps. And so I had to really deliberately carve out chunks of time where I actually had to close the door. I had to put a sign on the door saying effectively, do not disturb, but in a nice way, like, love you, but go away. And there was a lot of pressure on my partner as well, to really rally the troops and have them organized so that I could really dedicate myself to this. So, yeah, I want to be really transparent with people that this was not an easy process. It was not made easier by COVID. I didn't have quote unquote spare time. The spare time that I did have was dedicated to, developing the content for this book. And every step of the way, Christy, and I'm sure, well, actually, I'm not sure, but you may relate to this, is I just so desperately didn't want it to be a piece of shit. You know, I really didn't want it to be terrible. I wanted it to be decent at the absolute least. I did not want it to be harmful. I did not want it to be privileged and healthist and be put in that same kind of, you know, pit with most other kind of quote unquote wellness kind of books. I really wanted it to sit alongside books like Intuitive Eating and Anti-Diet and other books that people regard so highly, and for it to be in the useful pile, as opposed to, well, there was a bit there that was okay, but, you know, didn't really get anything new from it. So I was pretty keen to, you know, for all that effort to be, you know, for it to come to fruition in a way that felt in my integrity. Yeah.
I completely identify with that. I think, yeah, the desire to have a book that's enduring, that is helpful and useful and not harmful is so real for me too. And also I so identify with what you said about like the time, just I'm struck right now too, because I'm writing my next book, at how like time just takes on a different energy or a different dimension when it comes to writing a book. Like I could spend, 8 hours just researching and writing about one topic and then just not know where the time has gone at the end of the day, because it's so all encompassing. And that's part of the reason I put my podcast on hiatus recently, or announced that I'm putting it on hiatus, depending on when this comes out. It might be already on hiatus, but I don't have the bandwidth to be kind of jumping around to different things. And I really wanted to like fully dive into writing this book. So I very much identify with that feeling of like needing that extra time, and also admire you so much for being able to juggle all of that with having kids at home and basically having to take on like another job as a homeschool teacher, more or less, or at least homeschool kind of manager,
semi-supervisor. Right. Make sure you keep a coffee in your hand at all times.
Yeah, it sounds exhausting. And yeah, COVID has not really been a break for many, many people.
Yeah, no, I think I just want to be transparent about that, because I know there are lots of people out there who have got like a book in them, so to speak. And I was not one of those people who thought I had a book in me. I wasn't super interested, to be honest. I'm very glad I did it, like very glad. And it is definitely a different way that I can communicate with people that I normally wouldn't be communicating with. And yeah, but it actually is a huge privilege to be able to have had that time. I'm very lucky that we were in a financial position, that we're in we have great neighbors, for example, even in the highest of the lockdown kind of situations, we were still able to get fresh air and, get outside and, to be connecting with other people that way. And so that really, kept me going. So it was a really interesting time to write a book. I tell you, it was really interesting.
It is. And it probably puts so much of your self-care skills to the test, right?
Yeah, gotcha.
Like a lot of the values that you talk about in the book, I'm sure you had to live in order to be able to create the space to write the book.
Oh my God, yes, it's so true. And did so very imperfectly too. So, some days, as you know, Christy, and most of the listeners will know, I'm a yoga teacher as well, and I'm very dedicated to a mindfulness practice. And I've got to say that, that was one of the things that I regard so highly in my kind of suite of self-care practices. And if I was able to get down on the floor and take some breaths and do a short sequence, like literally 5 minutes, then I was like high-fiving myself all over the place, because that is what that looked like on some days. So I don't want to present any kind of illusion that, I had things all sorted, because there were some days and moments, and probably weeks and months actually, where I really didn't. I was, kind of scattered all over the place and just trying to hold things together. And I'm sure you relate to that, and I'm sure other people really relate to that. So yeah, I mean, something I know you and I share in common, Christy, is just bringing authenticity and transparency to to our experiences. And so we're not leading people to believe one thing when actually the other is true. So for anybody who's writing a book, yes, losing your shit will be part of the process.
Absolutely. It's sort of a rite of passage, I feel like.
I think so.
With this process. Well, so I had thought to touch on the mindfulness concept a little bit later, because it's the M of the A to Z, so it comes kind of in the middle. But since we're on the topic of mindfulness, I would love to, talk a little bit about why that's such an important guiding light for you in your work, and, specifically why the mindfulness that you talk about in the book and espouse in all of your work is so different than the quote unquote mindful eating that gets sold in diet culture.
Yeah. The mindful eating for weight loss type of thing, or the mindfulness so you can control your thoughts and feelings and behaviors. So, I have been a proponent and a practitioner of mindfulness based activity and movement for a number of years now, and to the point where I can't disentangle that from, nor would I wish to, from my everyday life. So M is mindfulness and A is awareness, and in some ways they have a lot of intersecting qualities. But mindfulness is broader than awareness because it invites us into a particular quality of awareness. By, being in the present moment, engaging with our senses, and really finding some steadiness and some ease in our moment-to-moment experiences without fixing or controlling or the doing too that is just so prevalent and prominent, not only within diet culture, but just also broader culture as well, and also embedded in some yoga practices and mindfulness practices themselves. So what I was aiming to really do with this chapter is to strongly set the scene that the spirit of present moment awareness, in other words, mindfulness, can be woven throughout lots of the other qualities that we're aiming to build. So, for example, vitamin B is brave or bravery. I wasn't too sure whether to call it brave or bravery, but anyway, and how being mindful and kind and present to our experiences really give us valuable information. And sometimes that it can be really brave and courageous to be speaking up. And sometimes it can be brave and courageous to actually sit back and really take our time. So the discerning quality of mindfulness is really prominent throughout the book, so that we're able to build a sense of discernment over our responses to our present moment experiences, rather than coming from a reactive place, which is very, very grounded, of course, in our autonomic nervous system, where, we tend to react in particular ways based on our life experiences, this kind of cascade effect of responsiveness or reactivity that is so grounded in our unconscious, our life experience, our history, and our unconscious. So, without getting too kind of down into the depths of it, what I was hoping to do is just weave and loop. I love a looping kind of story, or a looping way of talking about concepts. And I'll just tell you a little bit about what I mean by that, is that when we cover one topic, or we're talking about one particular concept, I find it personally so helpful, and I've had the feedback that other people find this helpful, is that we keep looping back to particular concepts right throughout a text, or throughout a podcast, or throughout a course or a series or something. So you're building on some of the foundations, and then I guess building is the best way to put it, and looping back to some of the foundations, because I think that's where, when we're losing some of those foundations of mindfulness, which encompasses awareness and curiosity, that's when we can find ourselves falling into all kinds of unconscious reactive kind of responses that we would really prefer not to be doing, or is not taking our lives in the meaningful direction.
That's really interesting. And, you know, as you're talking about the looping, I've realizing how helpful I find that myself in learning, and you know, something I really appreciated about your book too is that these themes sort of came up again and again in different ways, and you know, different vitamins or chapters kind of had a different approach to maybe a similar topic, or wove in something that was from earlier but in a new way. And it's just, I think, really powerful to keep building like that. And you know, I think especially like for me as someone with PTSD, where I do notice that sometimes I get reactive when I'm first learning about something, or, you know, there's like some defensiveness maybe coming up. And, you know, I think back to my own recovery from disordered eating and how like guarded and defensive I was against the ideas of health at every size, for example. The sort of need to loop back and continue revisiting with like greater and greater awareness, but also greater and greater resourcing around like how to calm my nervous system, or how to, you know, sit with the discomfort that might come up when experiencing new ideas. And so I'm wondering if that was sort of part of your thought process here too, is like giving people the space and the tools as well through some of these practices that you have in the book to kind of calm and center themselves so that they could be sort of more present, or able to take in some ideas that might have been challenging at the first iteration. Yeah,
absolutely. You're spot on there, because you know, as you know, Christy, you know, most of my quote unquote audience right now are my colleagues. They're other health professionals. So writing for my colleagues as well as, you know, general community members meant that I really had to have a particular style of messaging in mind. And what I was thinking about for this book is to keep it, not to necessarily to keep it simple, but to really make it grounded in some of the core concepts which are really integral to being able to live in diet culture, or live alongside diet culture with its ongoing challenges. So rather than being like a ticker box, as in, oh, awareness, got it, curiosity, got it, joy, done, you know, rather than kind of having it like, oh yes, I can do that. More, I really wanted it to be strongly grounded in the qualities that we're going to need if we're going to be not only surviving, but really living lives that feel really meaningful for us, whatever that means to us individually as well as collectively, and you know, in the broader culture. So rather than making it go in 20 different directions, I'm really hoping that this just gives people a solid grounding so that they can then go and, for example, feel way more equipped to head into, for example, anti-diet, you know, or books that really do have a lot more depth to them. You know, I mean, not only is it probably triple or quadruple the size of it, but it has a slightly different narrative, and it also goes much more deeper and broader. So in some ways, I'm kind of hoping this is a primer for people. And I mean, to kind of draw the parallel amongst this and eating disorder recovery, what I do notice is that people are very, very keen to like get to the good stuff, you know, quote unquote. And for example, intuitive eating, you know, and I'm a big proponent of intuitive eating as part of eating disorder recovery, and that we can, you know, from the very, very start, we can build in self-compassion, and we can build in awareness, and we can build in, you know, an awareness of diet police and so forth. But that, yeah, I'm just really hoping this gives people a really good grounding so that when they do, or if they choose to, you know, head into some different texts, especially maybe written by some more diverse writers with some maybe more challenging concepts, that people feel really equipped to like, okay, this is not the first time I've heard that phrase or that word. I feel like I get that, and I've done some practices, and now I'm ready for the so-called like next step, you know, so they're not surprised when they read For example, something by Virgie Tovar, an author who I adore, or someone like Sonia Renee Taylor, another author who I absolutely adore. They're like, okay, I'm ready. Like, I'm ready really to get into the real, to get right into the depths of these particular concepts.
Yeah, I love that. And, given that this is an audience of mostly dietitians, and, certainly there are some non-dietitians listening as well, but, I want to think about this maybe from a stages of change approach, right? Because that's kind of what we've been talking about here, is the stages of change. And I see that sort of woven into your book as well, even though you don't name it explicitly. I think there's a lot of kind of touching on the concepts from stages of change. And so, I'm curious, and I know too that you incorporate that in a lot of your work as well. And in the communication workshop that we did together, we had a whole topic on it, right? So, I'm just curious to sort of hear from you, like what the stages of change, how the stages of change informed your writing of this book. And maybe we can start by talking about what the stages of change are for anyone who isn't familiar with that term.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. So the stages of change is a transtheoretical model which was developed by two psychologists, I believe, or two therapists in the 1970s, called Prochaska and Di Clemente. And they originally developed the stages of change as more a model focusing around substance use. And it was a way to understand the process of behavior change. And then to inform other modalities. So, for example, motivational interviewing, in particular motivational interviewing, but also other modalities, CBT, ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, I'm sure DBT, and I'm sure all different kinds of modalities would in some ways be thoughtful about this model that was developed. It's like a long, long time ago now. So the stages of change, a lot of people listening will be familiar with it. I'm just going to name each stage, and rather than it being linear, it's often represented as almost like a looping or spiraling kind of representation, which starts with pre-contemplation. In our previous language, we used to call this denial, which we do not do anymore at all, because that is extremely pathologizing and really harmful. But pre-contemplation. So not ready for change, not interested in change. And then there is contemplation. So there is a little bit of interest in change. And this contemplation is really marked by what we might call ambivalence. And I don't want to pathologize ambivalence. It is an actual stage of change, and it is a very important place, actually. I think it is anyway. It can be very frustrating for people and for practitioners. I understand that, but it is actually a very powerful place, contemplation. And then there is preparation, when we've got we feel like we've got enough information and some experience on board to begin to put some changes in place, but not maybe to the degree which we would most prefer, or which is going to lead to longer lasting change. So that's preparation. And then there is the action stage, where we're actively engaged in behavioral change, which is leading us in the direction of what feels meaningful and important to us individually. And then there is maintenance, which is that it becomes more, I guess, easeful for these behavior changes to be continued over a period of time. And then there is another stage there, which I want to be really thoughtful about not pathologizing this particular stage, which is, in some texts, it's known as relapse. I don't particularly like that word, but I'm not the captain of language, and I certainly would not be telling anybody else how to name their own experience. So whatever you want to name the experience of, maybe shifting or slipping back into behaviors which are antithetical to a full and meaningful life, or however we frame this for ourselves. So to your question, what I really wanted to speak to here are people really in the contemplation and preparation stages, because what we know about these particular stages is equipping people with some more insight, some more knowledge, yes, knowledge and education, but mostly insight, and that we're able to recognize ourselves in others. Sometimes this is in storytelling, sometimes it's in reading other people's narratives or hearing other people's experiences. But we, as humans, this sense of belonging and connectedness is so strong in us that when we have cut ourselves off and isolated ourselves and feel like I'm the only one who does this to myself, I'm the only one who feels this way, that is one of the most hurtful kind of stages that we can be in as humans. And so to see our experiences written on a page, being relayed and being seen and witnessed and heard is very powerful. So I suppose what I was thinking about in the book with regards to stages of change is that, you know, if you needed a bit more information about what, for example, gratitude could look like, and that it doesn't have to look glittery, and also you don't have to be able to access gratitude every moment of every day. It is okay. So yeah, and mindfulness. Oof, there are tons of times when I'm super reactive and very not mindful at all. So what I really wanted to do was give a realistic kind of view of a lot of the concepts and qualities that have been a little bit like glitterized, you know, like gratitude, like curiosity, like mindfulness, like self-compassion, and to offer that space to people where it's like, and there will be moments where you do not feel compassionate towards yourself at all. And please know that you are human, you are deserving of kindness and care, even if you are not able to access it in that moment. So that was my kind of intention in the book, is to say, this is not a ticker box, and it's not a perfectionistic type of pursuit. You know, these ideas are not perfectionistic pursuits, but rather, you know, I hope that you recognize some of these things as you might find them helpful, you might not find them helpful, and that's okay, you know. Really offering it up as steps you might take if you felt willing and when you feel willing. So I'm sure that a lot of people will use this as a pick up, put down book. They'll pick it up when they're feeling like, I'd like to, you know, read or connect or understand a little bit more about a particular concept or idea, and then they'll put it down and then pick it up again and put it down. I mean, I use Anti-Diet that way, to be honest. I got it all bookmarked, and there are some places I go back and review, you know, for example, the intersection of anti-diet and anti-racism, for example, you know, things like that. So it's, you know, so helpful in that way as well.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. And I love that, you know, it kind of ties back into that looping idea that you were talking about, right? That we, you know, I think maybe a lot of us sort of learn that way, where we pick something up and put it down and reflect and, you know, work on it in our minds, and then pick it up again and revisit it from a different perspective. And yeah, I feel like your book is very much that too, that people are going to be able to, you know, get some good takeaways and some things to practice and think about and reflect on, and then, you know, go off and maybe do that in the world and then come back. And it's sort of deceptively short. Like it's actually very deep and profound, and there's a lot there. Like you could spend, you know, months on just one vitamin, one chapter, you know, one principle. And, you know, and yet you could also kind of read through it quickly and like take the whole thing as, you know, food for thought too. So there's lots of different ways to interact with it, I think.
Yeah, well, I am hoping that that's how it feels to people, is you are free to use this in whatever way feels okay to you, and just know that it's all okay. You know, just know that you are loved and you are cared for, you are worthy, you are valuable. And if there's something here that helps, then that's great.
I love that. And it's so contrary to what diet culture and wellness culture put out there, right? Like I was really struck in reading the gratitude chapter, but also like mindfulness and self-compassion and all those other ones you mentioned around how different this book is in terms of its like quote unquote instruction, I guess, in that way, like especially with gratitude, because I see in in wellness culture and, diet culture's new guise as the wellness diet, there's this maybe subset of it that's like manifesting culture, right? That's like, if your life is not going the way you want it to, or if you're experiencing hardship, it's because you don't believe in yourself hard enough. It's because you don't have enough gratitude. It's because you're not, you're doing things wrong. You're thinking wrong, right? It's wrong think that got you there, which is just such a load of crap, like just not at all, rooted in the real world and sort of understanding of oppression and trauma and things like that. It's just completely missing the boat on those things. And I feel like your way of explaining gratitude as sort of like a potential resource that you could use if you so choose is completely antithetical to that sort of manifesting culture conceptualization of it.
You're absolutely right. I think I think what has happened is that particularly around self-compassion, gratitude, mindfulness, those type of topics, is that it's almost become entangled in diet culture to the point where it becomes another thing to not be doing well enough, and becomes another thing to make us feel not good enough. Like, I'm not grateful enough. I'm not mindful enough. I'm not compassionate enough towards myself the way I am. And it just becomes another stick to beat ourselves with. So, and I see this, honestly, I see it in my clients. I recognize it in myself. I see it in other people constantly. And I just think it's one of the subtleties of diet culture that we're just coming to recognize now, is that the well-intentioned teachings, because the core teachings of this. So, for example, if you read, the self-compassion teachings of, for example, Kristin Neff, most of her stuff is amazing, or Christopher Germer, or there's so many amazing self-compassion teachers, or even trauma-informed teachers. That the core of what they are teaching is so beautiful and true, and really loyal to the intentions of these particular concepts. And yet, as usual, we, and by we I mean the royal we, as in the diet culture we, that we find a way to twist these concepts into yet another way to control. Self-compassion to control, mindfulness to control. And interestingly, control is the hardest thing to let go of, because it feels like sometimes maybe it's the only thing that's holding our life together. So it's and of course, most people would recognize that it's a big old illusion, that if we sit down and be quiet long enough, we realize very little is in our control, which is, oof. I don't know about you, Christy. I find that a really scary concept.
It's terrifying.
It's really terrifying.
A recovering control freak. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Yeah. So
this is reminding me, of your discussion of health, and health as a chapter, I think is really powerful, because, you talk about the misconceptions around health and healthism, and how that has really played out in diet culture and wellness culture, and why this book is such a different kind of redefinition of health, and what your definition of health really is. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that, because I think that ties in nicely with this idea of control, right? This idea that we can control our health if we just do the right things, if we just have the magic key to, punch in the numbers so that we live forever without ever getting sick or having any sort of chronic condition or whatever it might be. How do you see health as sort of opposed to that?
Yeah. So what I really loved about your interview with Dr. Lindo Bacon is the way that they really address this in their book, Radical Belonging. And I hadn't read Radical Belonging before I wrote this book, which is probably a good thing, really, because, well, yes, I suppose it was a good thing because I was able to kind of have a little bit of independent ideas around this. But for anybody that's kind of interested in Dr. Bacon's newest book, highly, highly recommend, and then also recommend you go listen on Food Psych. So what Lindo speaks about so beautifully is the idea that our quote unquote health has been this narrative around food, eating, exercise, really, and that when we are able to broaden and deepen our definitions of quote unquote health, that that we might come up with actually something really different. And I use the quote, it's one of my favorite quotes actually, is there's nothing healthy about eating your greens if you're going to stress over pizza. And what that really
That's one of my favorite quotes in the book. I love it so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Because I think what that speaks to is the idea that, we have narrowed our definition of health so much. And as dietitians, we are meeting clients and patients and people who are seeking our support that have very specific ideas about health for themselves and have absolutely been, entrenched in the idea from diet culture, as well as our medical system and our health system, and all through dietetics as well. It's focused on health, but it's very narrow. It's very narrow. And also we're kind of led to believe that if we, like you say, if we just do enough, then we are able to achieve health, whatever that means. Now, the thing that I find really interesting, and I'm going to say frustrating about this particular narrative, is the idea that it excludes people for whom, healthiness or improved health or whatever, it's just not even accessible. Not even accessible. People with chronic conditions, people who self-identify as disabled or have a disability, depending on how they identify, people with all kinds of different ways that they show up in the world, for whom the pursuit of health is actually going to harm them much, much more than being able to compassionately and kindly, index what's possible, and to seek support based on what's possible, what's accessible, what's realistic, what can be afforded, and so forth. So health is just a really interesting one, and I think it's one that we're going to. I mean, I hope in my lifetime we get our head around a redefinition of this. I have seen a shift, but we've got such a long way to go, especially in the so-called health professions. It's I won't lie and pretend that I don't feel, under pressure to be helping people be more healthy, whatever that means. But I think the issue, for example, in dietetics, is that it's not up to me. And it's not up to me to define what that looks like or sounds like or is like for somebody else. And we are not really taught to let go of our own agendas in order to let somebody take the lead and be that support point, be that co-driver. Don't take the steering wheel, let the other person take the steering wheel. That's really important part of what we call trauma-informed care, is letting the person really take charge of their own well-being, whatever that means, to them, and being a support person and understanding that everybody's health is very contextual on their lived experience.
Yeah. And I think I love that word well-being as opposed to wellness. It's actually something I've been playing around with myself as I'm writing this next book called Redefining Wellness, or that's the working title anyway. And what I really am feeling is that, having wellness be defined as this narrow set of physical health related practices, and even, when it's sort of like quote unquote spiritual or quote unquote mental health, it's actually still coming back down to this very like physical sort of materialistic approach, not really looking at the deeper needs and meanings and the social determinants of health that we know have such a huge impact on people's well-being at the, cultural level. And I know for me too, as like someone with multiple chronic illnesses and an eating disorder history, the eating disorder was never in the picture until I started trying to seek out, A, weight loss, right, which I thought was necessary, and B, alternative health treatments for the new problems and symptoms that I developed as a result of the disordered eating. And, the disordered eating really sort of dovetailed and maybe triggered a number of chronic illnesses that I still live with today, 20 years later, and so it's been so interesting for me in my own lived experience to kind of recognize how harmful the pursuit of quote unquote health was, and that letting go or sort of easing up on that pursuit and looking for approaches that sort of treated me as a whole person and that address my mental health has actually helped so much more. And recognizing the privilege I have in that too, and that I have access to healthcare, which not everyone does, and certainly not everyone in the US does, and access to mental health care as well, which is prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. And like just knowing that, the care that I've been able to sort of cobble together and advocate for myself to get has been so much better than when I was kind of just, taking the standard advice of physicians and other health professionals that was very much that, top down sort of teaching, like I tell you what to do and you go do it sort of thing, because that felt so very just based on the physical, the material, not at all sort of addressing the larger issues that were going on for me in my relationship with food and my body and just my lack of coping skills in general,
Yeah, I think a lot of people would relate to that for sure. It's it's interesting that you speak to the pursuit of health for many people is actually more harmful than helpful. And the other thing that we haven't talked about is the pursuit of health. Two things. One, as it's conflated with weight, shape, and size. And two, as it's conflated with value and worth. So that we are led to believe that we are more valuable and worthy if we are pursuing body improvement, or we're pursuing nutritional improvement, or health condition improvement, for example. And if we choose to do nothing, which by the way is still doing something, it is an autonomous choice actually, that that is seen as almost amoral, or as unacceptable. The choice to take care of myself in a way that is not dominantly spoken about. In other words, if I choose not to do this to my body, that is absolutely part of people's choice. And I think we forget that part of it too, is, and loop us back, I guess this comes back to discernment. Like, how is this pursuit going for me? Like, is it leading me further in the direction of what I value and what feels really meaningful for me? Or am I like a hamster on a wheel? Am I feeling like I'm kind of getting nowhere and expending all this kind of time, energy, and money, and, the life thief, as you refer to in Anti-Diet? Is this really heading me in the direction that I want to, or do I need to pause, slow down, and get a sense of where am I? Get a sense of direction. Where am I? How helpful is this, whatever this is? Do I, would it be helpful for me to reimagine things, or to seek another, not another expert's or person's thoughts, but to seek another avenue of some description? So I think the discernment of being able to follow a path which feels meaningful for us, I think it's definitely been caught up in this virtuous, moralistic way of being, which I find really disturbing, to be honest.
I do too, completely. And it's interesting, like my mind is going in so many directions right now, because, use the term like, value and worth, right? Earlier on, like that, our society views people who are quote unquote healthy or quote unquote pursuing health in the way that that's currently construed as having greater value and greater worth. But then also we're talking about like, values in terms of where do you want to go? Where do you want to be putting your energy, and what's actually important to you in your life? And I think that in some ways, the value that that society imposes on us to say that this type of person is the only type of person who is valuable sometimes stands in for our own values without us even realizing it, because that's just the received wisdom. That's just the culture that we live in, right? Is that we receive these ideas about what is valuable or what holds value. And it kind of supplants our own intrinsic sense of values. And so I would be so curious to talk with you a little bit about values, because that really comes up in a lot of your work, and it's one of the principles in your book. And I'm just, I love the activities that you do in some of your workshops around helping people to sort of define their values. And it's so interesting how like conscious of a choice that has to be to sit down and reflect on our values and write them out, or, figure out what is really meaningful and important to us in this society that's always trying to impose its values on us. Right.
Yes. So values are really interesting, because I think being able to disentangle us from our dominant socializations and from who we think we should be and how we have been led to believe we should be showing up in the world to hold intrinsic value is something that I think most humans, particularly in more developed countries, find challenging. So how do we separate out what feels truly intrinsically value driven to us versus what has been handed to us, without our consent usually, what has been handed to us through our socializations and through cultural attitudes and so forth. So the reason why I really love the topic of values is if it's set up well, that we are able to set aside some space where we have access more to our true wisdom and our true heart and what feels really resonant for us. So the literature around values is really interesting, because when people identify their particular, if we were to just say the top 3 or top 5 values, the more they self-identify with behaving in alignment with those values seems to correlate with life satisfaction, which is interesting. Now, this lies independent of things like race, culture, age, socioeconomic status as well. So I find that really interesting, is that we don't necessarily, I have never read a study that has looked at stigmatization or racism or, fat phobia or any of those things which significantly impact the way that we have been led to believe we deserve to show up in the world, and, how we can align with the values that we hold so dear. So if anybody has that literature, I would be very, very interested. I haven't seen it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, of course, because hello, I don't own Google Scholar. So there we go. Values is a really interesting one, because it can bring us back really to what energizes and connects us to each other and to the world. So I'll tell you a quick funny story. Very early on, when I met our mutual friend, Marcy Evans, we were talking about values and how much we really enjoyed integrating values work into our eating disorder recovery work and into our supervision work as well. And she said to me, "Oh, what are your top values?" And I think I said something like, this is so weird that I can't even kind of just rattle them off. But it would have been something like connectedness, adventure, and fun, right? So I said fun, and I was a little bit sheepish. And she said, "Oh my God, so is mine. Like, fun is in my top 3 as well." And I don't think to that point I had ever met anybody who fun was in their top 3. And so we were laughing and carrying on as, we typically do anyway. But it was a really interesting moment because I felt so seen. I really felt seen, that lightheartedness and fun and discovery and laughter, and for me, everything that kind of encompasses fun I felt so lovely for that to be witnessed. I felt like a permission for that to be something that was really important to me and something that I could really hold close and enact as often as I wished. And I found that a really interesting experience, because I must say that even with somebody who I trust so implicitly, like Marcy, I felt a little bit sheepish around saying, "Ooh," and fun. And she was like, "Oh my God, me too." And just that being witnessed was so powerful. And so I think the point that I'm trying to make here is it's not only being witnessed by somebody else, but being self-witnessed. Witnessing ourselves and saying, "Hey, that's really cool. Good for you." That is a worthy value. That is, not that it's up to me to name whether something's worthy. And not that I would say that to anybody else necessarily, but to say that to ourselves is to say, and that value is important to you. It's important for particular reasons. And that's okay. You don't have to keep looking to the side and comparing to anybody else, or, see if that's a quote unquote good enough value. God, the number of times, Christy, that I've had conversations with people saying, "Oh, I don't know what I should choose," or "I don't know what's the right thing to choose." And I'm like, not that I would say this to an individual, but I'm like, here we go. It's diet culture in action, like that sense of what should I be choosing that makes me a good enough person? Is fun good enough? Well, I'm here to tell you it is. I have decided that fun is good enough.
I so agree. It's funny when you wrote about that in the book too, about like crossing off, the things, trying to get from your top 10 to your top 3, which is like an activity that just stumps me every time. And I've done it multiple times, and I think come up with a different top 3 different times, because, it changes by the day maybe, or so, I don't know. But also I think part of it is that sense of, is this okay? Is it okay that I put these things in my top? Because, a top 10 list of values, I feel like is not easy, but I think is more forthcoming, for a lot of people. I think for me, it was relatively painless to get to okay, these are my top 10. I feel pretty good about this. But to go from top 10 to top 3, what are my real guiding lights? It's like, oof, that just feels so, there's so much sort of comparison and moralization that can happen. And, like you said in the book, you crossed off family, and
I was
you had to make room, right?
God, what does that mean about me?
Right. I know. And I've felt the same way too, where it's like family does not make my top 3, and, various times that I put it. But also to me, one of my top 3 consistently has been curiosity, which I know is one of your principles in the book too. And I feel like that, encompasses other things, right? To me, a sense of curiosity and exploration permeates all of my close relationships, and is a foundational thing that I share with my family and my chosen family, and that, I feel like that it's there, those important relationships are there, even if the term, the overarching term of family isn't in the top 3, right? That how I show up in my close relationships and the people that I choose or that I have formed those close bonds with, we do share some of these core values.
Yeah, I think you raise a really important point there. And I often encourage people, rather than thinking about it as people, is to think about qualities. What is the spirit or the energy or the quality that you want to be bringing to your relationships, to the world, to your community? Because when people literally see themselves crossing family off the list, that can be really confronting. And of course, we're able to, calm that down a little bit by saying, it doesn't matter that it doesn't mean they don't matter. It's just that let's think about the quality. So for me, connectedness reminds me about all my relationships, including family. So I sometimes think that the setup of that activity is really important, and to allow people to explore with freedom a lot of these qualities, but not get kind of bogged down in into these narrow precipices that we can find ourselves in around, oh, is that good? Is that bad? What does this mean about me?
And there's so much like received wisdom around that too, kind of going back to the whole idea of like the social, imposition of values or ideas about what's worthy and what's right. Like, nothing is right or wrong. It's just we want to get to know ourselves and know what drives us and know what values really are our guiding lights. And I don't think, there's maybe cultural differences around, are you supposed to have family as like your number one, right? And what does it, quote unquote, say about you if you don't? There's more to unpack maybe if you're socialized to expect that that's going to be such a primary value. And like, you still deserve to have whatever values you hold, and that's, I think, it's just so hard to shed that sort of comparison and that feeling of like, am I okay? Is somebody going to check this? Like, is somebody going to see this paper that I'm writing on at this conference and, judge me over my shoulder, whatever.
And you raise a really good point around, I was noticing as you were speaking that there are so many parallels there with diet culture recovery or eating disorder recovery that, am I doing this right? Am I doing this good enough? And then all the other attributes that we're maybe building through that process, like self-compassion and mindfulness, for example, like, am I doing this correctly? Am I doing it good enough? And what that really speaks to is really how we can hold ourselves steady when, when there are so many pressures that we're not necessarily, unless we reach enlightenment, which, not in my lifetime, that's not going to happen, but, or not that that's where I'm aiming for, but, that we do have to live in a world where there is inequity and grief and loss and so much full-on stuff. But how can we hold ourselves steady alongside this sense of I know it sounds really kind of a little bit trite to bring it back down to this, but I'm doing what I can. I'm good enough just as I am in this moment. However I show up and whatever efforts I am able to make towards myself and towards others, that it's all okay. And to just really honor our capacity at any one point in time. We're not always going to be aligned with our values at all. We're not always going to enjoy, a peak life satisfaction. But that, feeling, witnessing ourselves, witnessing our own experiences with reverence and compassion can kind of just really lay that groundwork for the long game. Because like you and I speak about all the time, Christy, if we're going to smash this stuff, if we're going to smash diet culture, it really is a long game. Like it's not, this is not going to be done, in the short, in weeks and months and even years. This is a long game. So it's a chipping away, and to be able to chip away, if we were to use the word successfully, what we're really needing to do is to stay really steady in our own wise selves, and to encourage and support others to do the same, so that we can do this together. Because it's not going to be done by one person, that's for sure.
That is for sure. And yeah, like you said, we might not see the change in our lifetime, but the change is coming and we can be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a long process and requires so much self-compassion to go through. And I think that's, going back to sort of the, misapplication or misconstrual of ideas like self-compassion and mindfulness and gratitude. It's like, we need to have compassion for ourselves, even when we're not living in line with our values, right? Even when we're pulled away, because we will be pulled away again and again. And I love in the chapter on mindfulness, how you talk about, people wanting to quote unquote, do it right with mindfulness too, and trying to meditate and then being like, oh God, I'm getting distracted. That means I'm not doing it right. And your point of, reassuring people like, yeah, that's the practice, right? That's it.
That is actual practice.
We're going to get distracted. We're going to get pulled away, and noticing that and maybe being able to gently bring ourselves back to that when we have the capacity or not. Sometimes I'll spend 20 minutes in meditation, just like, thinking about a work problem or something.
Yes.
Right? And just, the timer goes off and I'm like, oh, well, okay, that's what that was, and right.
Oh dear. Yes. Yeah. Because I don't relate to that at all, Christy. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
I mean, right. Nobody is perfect. We're not some paragons of this.
Oh my God.
Those of us teaching it
Oof.
have our messy lives as well.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully, in both anti-diet and, redefining wellness or redefining well-being, whatever you end up calling it, and also vitamin A to Z. I really hope that this really shines through, that you and I are really no bullshit people who really aim to show up and say, look, we're not perfect. We both have a lot of privilege, and also we're just trying to do our best, same as everybody else. We're just trying to show up and do our best and be in community with other people who are also, making those same efforts, or, trying to shift this giant shit show that we call diet culture. Oh dear. Oh, Christy, thank you so much. Was there anything else that you wanted to kind of ask or talk about, or?
I could talk with you forever, and I feel like there's a million topics that I had on my list that we sort of, have circled around and done the, the touch in and go, looping back, right? So I love how looping this conversation has been.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted, I guess the last thing that sort of struck me in this book, and that maybe would be a good note to end on, actually, would be thinking about, how the skills of, this book, I think it does a really good job of giving a bunch of tools and skills or principles and practices to work on that both help people in healing their relationships with food, and you make those connections very clearly, but also are helpful in all other aspects of life, right? And at sort of creating this sense of truly holistic well-being, not holistic in the, quote unquote sense that the wellness diet loves to make us believe, but truly holistic, where it attends to all of our facets as human beings and, the best way possible, given the tools we have at the time. And yeah, so I'd just love to, hear your thoughts, if you have any, on kind of how healing our relationships with food and our bodies can broaden out into, healing our well-being or our mental health in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I see, one of the things that I love and appreciate most about being a dietitian, because in some ways, there's a part of me that's like, should I go back and retrain as a therapist? And that thought lasts about 5 seconds before I think about the debt that I would accrue doing that and the time and effort that it would take. And I think to myself, one of the greatest gifts of being a dietitian is the way that our challenges are expressed, or what we are tasked with as humans can be so expressed through our relationships with food and eating. And that, when we find ourselves getting entangled in, for example, dichotomous thinking, or we feel constantly not good enough with, for example, our eating practices or within our bodies, that what an interesting exploration it is to consider how this shows up for us in other areas of life. And so being able to see ourselves and to see food as almost like a compass point, I think is really, really, really interesting, especially within a culture which has very, very specific ideas around food and eating and body shapes and sizes, that we feel this, maybe this faux, faux as in FAUX, this faux sense of achievement when we make dietary changes or when our body changes, because our actual source of dissatisfaction lies in a completely different space. So we almost like trick ourselves in a way that the improvement that I'm making to my nutrition or to my exercise or to my physical being is then automatically translated into other areas of life. And for a vast majority of people, this doesn't hold true, especially not long term. But that, how interesting it is that we find this language, the language of, food and eating and body relationships, that can allow us just such an interesting scope into our inner worlds and what it is that we need. Like, what is it that provides my life with satisfaction and nourishment and fullness? All these words are words that we use with eating, right? Satisfaction, fullness, nourishment. So if we were to broaden that out and think about what this means in terms of, a more full life or a more nourished existence or more satisfied work life or relationships or whatever it is, like, it takes on a whole different way of understanding ourselves, which I think is really precious, to be honest. I think it's incredible.
That is so beautiful. That is, I love everything you shared there, and just in the book as well. I feel like it's such fodder for conversation. I think it's going to really spark a lot of conversations between people and also within people, people kind of thinking through these ideas with themselves. And I'm really, really grateful I got to interview you about the book and that it's out there in the world.
Oh, Christy, I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much for joining me. You are so experienced with, interviewing people, and you have given your time and energy so generously. So I really appreciate your support, and thank you everybody to who's listening. Thanks for your support too. And thanks for listening to us chitty chat. It's basically, this is how Christy and I talk all the time with each other. We walk around parks and, well, when we're in person, when we're lucky enough to be in person, and we have dinners and Zoom meetings and all kinds of things. So this is actually, maybe a little bit more formal than we usually talk, and a little less sweary, might I say. Oh my God, a lot less sweary.
I'm kind of amazed that we got through this without swearing. I
know. I mean, what the fuck, right?
Right?
Gotcha.
Just fucking blow it up right now.
Okay, now we're bringing it. This is good. This feels a lot better.
And the snort laugh. We get the snort laugh too.
Yes, the snort laugh, the Christy Harrison snort laugh. I love it. Oh, thank you so much, my friend. So appreciative of you. And thank you again. Wow, amazing. Well, that's our episode of the Mindful Dietitian interview series for today. Thank you so much to our wonderful guest and to you for listening. I really hope you enjoyed it. Just a reminder that you can find me over on the website www.themindfuldietitian.com.au, and please join actually quite a large group of wonderful and enthusiastic dietitians on the closed Facebook group, The Mindful Dietitian. The music you hear is called Happiness from Ben Sound, used under the Creative Commons license. Have a great day, everyone.